This episode is brought to you by Adobe Acrobat. So here's something I've been thinking about. We spend so much time creating documents, reports, research, press kits, briefings, and then we just attach them to an email and hope someone reads them. That's not a workflow problem. That's a communication problem. Adobe's new productivity agent in Acrobat is built to fix exactly that. It can take your documents and turn them into actual experiences. AI-powered workspaces called PDF spaces, where you can combine files, links, and notes to do research, surface insights, and create content that people actually can explore and interact with. And you can customize how the AI guides readers through it, too, adding your branding and seeing who actually engaged with it. Vice News is already using this for on-the-ground reporting and cross-platform content. Kid Cudi uses it for his podcast prep. And honestly, this one makes total sense. Celebrity event planner Mindy Weiss uses it to package her expertise for clients. The idea is simple. Stop sending files. Start sharing experiences. Check it out at adobe.com/acrobat. Hi, welcome to the Media Copilot. It's a podcast about how AI is changing media, news, and communication. I'm your host, Pete Pachal. I covered tech for a long time as a journalist. Now I talk to the media leaders, the builders, and the creators, trying to answer the question, how will we get information in the future? And how will that transform journalism and the business of media? Quick housekeeping note, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave a 5-star review and maybe a nice comment. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like the video that's down there, the button down there, and subscribe to the channel if you don't mind. Those things really do help more people find the show. All right, this week we're talking about a trend that suddenly feels very real, tech companies becoming media companies. So to dive into this newly relevant topic, my guest today is Jonathan Hunt. He's the VP of Media and Content at HubSpot and head of The Hustle. HubSpot has built a major media operation across newsletters, podcasts, video, creator partnerships, and it's acquired brands like The Hustle, My First Million, Mindstream, and Starter Story. That matters right now because AI isn't just changing how people discover information, but how brands build trust, which is very important in media, I hear. OpenAI's acquisition of TBPN brought this whole topic into focus recently. When a company owns the product, the platform, and the media channel, what happens to trust? What happens to independence? And what does it mean for the future of media when the software company decides that audience is not just something to buy, but something to own? Jonathan, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Pete, thanks for having me. Big fan, longtime listener, excited to chat.
Awesome. Oh, thanks for that. Before we get into it, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, sir. So please tell my audience, who are you?
Yeah, so you did a fantastic setup, but I've been at HubSpot now for a little under 3 years, really to help expand its media network. And to your point, how we think about media, it's less of a transactional relationship with audiences, and it's more of a way to continue to speak to prospective customers of HubSpot throughout the year. And we do that across a number of different channels: YouTube, newsletters, podcasts, creator partnerships. Before HubSpot, I was more on the B2C media side. So really building out the marketing and audience development operations at media companies like Vox Media, which is obviously in the news right now, National Geographic, Complex, and Vice Media, which is coincidentally also in the news as of late again. I think what I saw was an opportunity to really help expand a non-traditional media model that really values high quality, editorially independent content and really great journalists and talented voices, and to do so in a way that might look a little different than traditional media, but still gives those voices a platform. And so, excited to talk more about that.
Nice. So those are huge brands like Vice and Vox and National Geographic, et cetera. So what is it is sort of specifically from those consumer media brands? Like, HubSpot's basically a B2B software company. So what specifically translates from the consumer media world into the B2B world?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, in consumer media, your brand is either your masthead or it's voices, like singular voices. And Vox Media, those voices were everyone from Nilay Patel to Ezra Klein to Kara Swisher to Amanda Clute, etc. Vice, same thing, like lots of really talented journalists, and the same thing at Complex, the same thing at National Geographic. And so the idea of kind of entrusting individual voices with your message within B2B is a little foreign and novel. And so the idea of being able to lean into subject matter experts and voices that actually have the trust today is like a big principle that I think is translating really nicely to B2B companies, especially in a world where the expectation is not that those media brands, those voices become mouthpieces for the brand, but that they help connect you to audiences that already have that trust, that already look to those people for recommendations, ideas, insights that allow us to then connect with them directly as well. So that's one. The idea of audience development, as well, not, traditional direct response paid advertising, but like how do you really build an owned and operated audience organically across channels where audiences are discovering content and forming those relationships with those journalists or those creators, on a given day. And so, it's really about subject matter expertise. It's really about journalistic talent, and it's really about giving those voices a platform. I'm proud that we can do that through HubSpot Media.
So now into this world of the audience relationship that you've sort of outlined, and why it's potentially something brands are interested, not just potentially, but obviously are.
Yeah.
Into this world, we have AI, right, which is now this intermediary, which is clearly affecting audience acquisition in some really important ways. And maybe it's better sort of explain rather like than to sort of look at it theoretically. Think about like one of your brands, like Acquiring the Hustle, and what the thesis of that, acquiring something like that, what that is in a world without AI, and then how does it change in a world with AI?
Yeah, I would say it probably becomes even more valuable in the age of AI, especially whenever the ability to create content is easier than ever, but the bar for quality has obviously increased as a result as well. Anyone with Claude can create content, but whether that's great content or not is definitely more of a subjective question. And
Mm,
so what we've seen is that in the age of AI, where AI generated content is now outpacing human created content, that people are looking for things that feel a lot more genuine and authentic, that are coming from real human beings that have lived experiences and have points of perspective and expertise that Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity just don't have.
mm,
And so I would say that's been a huge impetus for us to do recent acquisitions, to be able to create more moats around these like areas of expertise within content verticals that are important to HubSpot Media. The thesis behind the Hustle acquisition was a little, I would say, it was a little prescient in that we saw that the cost of acquiring customers through traditional paid media was becoming more and more expensive.
mm,
We saw that the path to purchase had become a lot more complex. Like in, traditional B2B marketing, it was like this nice linear path where you would have a really wide top of the funnel and you would create content, and that content would hopefully convert people into becoming a lead, and then hopefully that would convert into a customer. But Gartner just originally did a research survey recently that showed that the average B2B software purchase funnel is 30 different steps and 9 to 10 decision makers. And so if you're not active across as many of those steps as possible, you kind of don't necessarily exist in the minds of customers. And so the idea there was, how can you own as much surface area as possible and
mm,
stay present in people's lives during the 95% of the year when they're not going to buy a piece of software. And so
yeah.
that's been kind of like the thesis that we've carried throughout the last 5 years, from the hustle to the acquisition of Mindstream, and then Starter Story, and most recently Futurepedia as well, but also has been the motivation for us to continue to expand the network by launching net new media products as well across platforms like YouTube and email and audio and websites.
So it's, I get like the thing that resonates most in what you're talking about, I feel like, is surface area, right? Like you're getting, like more touch points at people where people are, not even, whether they're at the beginning of the
Yeah.
funnel, if you're losing that speak, but they're just being relevant in their lives more and more. But I'm specifically thinking about like the AI component of that, where it's like it's not just about people being visible to people; it's being visible to bots to some
Yes.
extent, right? So, give me a sense of like how you think about that, and like I presume for your owned and operated that
Yeah.
they're crawlable. That for you guys, it's there's the sort of what existential question that media companies have of like, do I let bots crawl or not? Is not as existential because it's not like the content is the path to
Yeah.
something as opposed to the product.
Yeah. And I think we're fortunate in that our monetization model is a little different in
Yeah.
that with traditional media companies, oftentimes your largest source of revenue is you being able to generate as much traffic or as much viewership as possible and then being able to monetize that based off of a CPM or a fixed rate card. For us, it's more about getting high quality, high intent attention and then
Mm,
converting them into potential customers of HubSpot. And how people discover that doesn't matter to us as long as the audience intent is high. And what we're seeing oftentimes is people discovering HubSpot or our media products through LLM surfaces like ChatGPT or Cloud or Perplexity is that while it obviously converts in terms of traffic back to our website at a much lower volume than traditional search, the conversion rate once people hit those pages is often 3x more valuable. So people are three
mm.
times more likely to convert into a customer than if they were to come from the traditional menu of 10 blue links.
Treat that audience differently in some way. Like, first of all, can you identify it? Like, oh, this person's from an AI engine, and therefore, do you speed them along the funnel, or is it just you just rely on the statistic that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So we have a full funnel measurement solution where we are able to see audiences that come from different LLMs and then being able to assign them a certain value that allows us to then track them from becoming a viewer of our site to becoming a lead to becoming a qualified lead to becoming a paid customer. And then through that, how long they stick around with us and translating that into things like monthly reoccurring revenue, annual reoccurring revenue, and then ultimately a lifetime
I
value
guess
for
I
them.
guess what I'm wondering also is like, is the experience dynamic in some way?
Oh, is the experience dynamic? Yeah, we do that, and we do it on a UTM basis.
Hmm.
Obviously, you don't necessarily have that luxury on LLMs, where it's discovering individual pages, not UTM'd pages. But
Hmm.
we do have the ability to serve up personalized web experiences based on the sources that people are coming from. And so, how we treat that from an AEO perspective, so like for answer engine optimization, is we have two versions of our website that's served up. One is
Okay.
for people that are human beings that are discovering us through the LLMs and therefore need to be able to see and consume our messaging and our copy and our visuals in a certain way that's just natural to them. And the second is a version of the site that's made specifically for the LLMs, which is much more structured data,
Mm,
questions that are being answered, and a lot of data and insights that oftentimes would cause a human to kind of glaze over.
mm.
So we do, approach that differently, whether you're an LLM bot or a human being. But it's become a pretty significant part of our strategy, and it's not just the website, right? It's how can you then start to also treat investments in channels like YouTube or LinkedIn as not just ways of reaching audiences through those platforms, but ways to also influence what gets surfaced across the LLMs. Because you're seeing channels like Reddit, LinkedIn, and YouTube become more and more valuable for what gets cited and what gets recommended within surfaces like ChatGPT.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious about how much do you're obviously like very cognizant of AEO and GEO and figuring out how to make sure your content is parsable by both humans and bots. Is there some liberal use of AI in your editorial process as well?
Yeah, so we use AI to support the production process, but not to automate the production process, if that makes sense. And so within a normal production cycle, whether it's for text or video, AI is helping do some of the research, which is in fact checked by a human. It's helpful in translating content into different languages, like non English speaking languages. It's helpful for things like clipping, it's helpful for things like transcriptions, but we usually have different checkpoints within the production process where a human with actual taste can then say, this is great, this is not great, punch it up, make sure that's factually correct, and just make sure that it's as good as possible before we click publish. But even with that kind of like approach to AI to enable content production, we've been able to actually find 30 to 40% efficiency savings in terms of the time it takes to go from idea to publish, both for text, but
Nice.
also for video as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get that up to 50 or 60.
That's the vision, right? There's always going to need to be a human in the loop, but I think the models are getting so much better in terms of like understanding what good looks like, not necessarily to the level of a human, but to the point where it just minimizes a lot of like the back and forth and the thrash that you oftentimes see in the post production process, which has been a pretty big unlock for us.
Sure. So switch tracks a bit. I mentioned TBPN in the intro there,
Yeah.
and it's getting a little bit distant now, but still, it's the effects of it are going to be reverberating for a while. It seemed to surprise a lot of people, that acquisition, that OpenAI bought TBPN. Did it surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was surprising and not surprising. It was not surprising in that I do believe we are starting to see a shift in what passes as a media model. And I think for the longest time, there was kind of a little bit of an allergy to the idea of software companies or tech companies owning media, because I think the sort of knee jerk reaction to that is like, oh, it's going to become a shill for the company that buys it. Um, that's a possibility. It's definitely not our MO whenever we make acquisitions. But I think also it was surprising in that it wasn't necessarily the biggest media brand in the world. It was very much a clips play than a long form play. And it kind of was unclear what the acquisition thesis was from the outside looking in. Like I'm sure there's like a really sound acquisition thesis there,
Mm,
but whenever you're a company like OpenAI, where you are the largest LLM and you're already working with all the major Fortune 500 companies, um, you know, what value does TBPN bring to you?
mm.
And again, I'm sure there's like a really logical answer there, but I guess it's more of one of these things where I'm sure we're going to find out over time.
Yeah, I feel like Sam Altman is out all the time on podcasts anyway.
Yeah.
Like, this must feel like I should be getting a cut of this, all these
Yeah.
clicks I'm getting. I don't know. That's probably,
Yeah.
well, it's obviously not it, but I mean, it is kind of like, clearly, the next time there's a big announcement, I think there's probably going to be breaking it with TVPN.
I'm sure, and TBPN, I think like the production value is incredible. I think John
Sure.
and Joy are great on camera talent. Obviously, they have really great guests as well, and I think they've kind of done a lot of good for the creator economy, and have invented like a really great live format that is obviously now being repeated by a bunch of other companies and creators out there. And so I think they definitely broke some ground there. And so I'm just excited to see like what ultimately becomes of TBPN if they can continue to expand that in a way that stays editorially independent, but also has a very sound monetization model.
Well, I agree, and I think the editorial independent stuff is more complicated because there's a couple of dimensions to it. So I was joking about Sam Altman, but if you do envision that, there's breaking news about OpenAI. How are they going to cover it?
Right.
If Sam Altman comes on, are they going to be tough with him? And if they are, is that just performative? What I feel like I'm getting at here is that, and I'd love to hear about how you guys navigate this,
Yeah.
which is like something can be fully independent, even in practice, which is, and I have some experience with this. I worked at CoinDesk for a while. It was owned by DCG at the time, and CoinDesk would often get accused of being a DCG shill, even though we were fully independent, and no one from DCG ever called the edit team or even the executives and was like, you got to take this down or whatever. That just
Yeah.
never happened. So we were independent. We were great journalists. I think that was borne out by a lot of the stories we broke, including all the stuff about Sam Bankman-Fried. But there's also the perception factor. There's a perception that's a part of it,
Yeah.
regardless of how it's structured. So there are obviously always going to be people you can't convince. I mean, for whatever
Of
reason,
course.
but maybe that's the price you pay. And, but there's also the people that might still give you a chance, but would lean towards not because of the
Yeah.
situation. How do you navigate this?
It's interesting. I have a lot of journalist friends, and I've talked to a lot of journalists since I've joined HubSpot. And I would say like 9 times out of 10, people get it. Like they're excited that there is a sustainable media model that's helping employ really qualified and amazing journalists and creating new jobs and being able to like support media in a way that maybe traditional models just can't anymore. And then there's the 1 out of the 10 that are kind of like the folks that are the skeptics, right? Like you see HubSpot plus media, and your instant assumption is that it's just product marketing. And no matter what I say to those folks, they just don't believe it. And I've just kind of accepted that that's just going to be the fact. It looks different, it sounds different, and so therefore, like some people's minds, you just can't change. But I find oftentimes that is a small minority of folks, as opposed to the 99% of people that just appreciate great content that just so happens to be subsidized by HubSpot. And we really just prioritize like giving folks like Sampar and Sean Puri and Pat Walls from Starter Story, and like all of the folks that are on screen or in your inbox, a platform, marketing resources, staffing resources, and the editorial autonomy they need to just create really high value work that just helps people do their jobs better, whether you're a marketer, a seller, or a business builder.
And how do you do the messaging internally, either like when you acquire or even to convince someone to be acquired, and sort of in day to day?
Yeah. So whenever we work with companies that maybe we're considering acquiring, or maybe like creators we're going to work with, we kind of are very upfront with them that, hey, look, like how we see this relationship is not transactional, it's collaborative. So like how we work with creators, for example, is we are not handing creators a script and saying, this is what we want you to say whenever you're doing your live read. We hand them a brief and say, hey, look, you know your audience the best. Can you help us create something that you would want to give your audience, regardless of HubSpot being behind it, that provides a lot of value that they can't get anywhere else? And we're just going to let you run with it. You know your audience best. You have the trust. The last thing we want to do is ever disrupt that. And we do the same thing with acquisitions as well. I mean, oftentimes whenever we're working with a company that we potentially might acquire, they start as a creator. And so we work with them for a month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and we get to know them. They get to know us, and we just make sure that like it's a really good relationship. At the same time, we're also giving them resources that like as a solopreneur they don't have access to. We're putting them on stage at our inbound event in Boston every single year, and we're helping just grow their channels, even though they're creator partners of ours and not part of the HubSpot media ecosystem. And so we really do see these as just partnerships where we play a certain role, they play a certain role, and everyone understands what the swim lanes are. And in an ideal world, we can help them do some things that they just can't do on their own.
And how do you think about acquire or in-house versus, creator partnerships? Or I assume you're still doing things like maybe branded content and even campaigns and stuff like that. So it's like, how does how do you sort of, I guess, when you're setting
Yeah.
out to have some kind of uh, goal or messaging, like how do you sort of decide between all of this stuff?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the way that our team is structured is our media division is part of a larger marketing team, and our marketing team is structured around a brand marketing function, which does a lot of the, how do we show up at the Australian Open, or how do we show up at Wimbledon, for example? Like, how do we do long term partnerships with big sporting franchises, or show up at other industry moments that our different customers might be at? We have an experiential team that does a lot of our events, both trade events as well as owned events. We have a product marketing and a demand team that's really focused on direct response advertising across platforms like Meta, LinkedIn, et cetera. And then we have our media team. And media, we see it as being an organic investment. So everything that we do is editorial first, and we break it up into 3 different plays. One is the built model. So properties that we build from scratch, such as our AI marketing series called Marketing Against the Grain. We have a number of those that we've built from scratch without acquiring it. We have our acquisition model, which was the Hustle, Mindstream, Starter Story, and Futurepedia. And then we have our creator partner model, which is about 150 creators across different business verticals that we partner with at various stages of their own creator trajectory, and ideally try to work with them early on so that as they grow, our investment in them also grows, and we can continue to work with them in ways that might ultimately one day lead to an acquisition.
Nice. And as AI continues to affect all those industries, obviously not just the media industry,
Yeah.
but the SaaS industry. Maybe we'll talk about that for a minute in terms of like the SaaS apocalypse and
Yeah.
how it's looking from the inside, I guess, a little bit from y'all. How is that affecting, well, first HubSpot, but also just kind of your approach to things like build or buy when you look at sort of when media and potentially things you could acquire or even spin out or what have you.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like everyone's planning no further than 6 months down the road, but then how does that affect, a brand like yours and the people that work in your media division?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, I don't think brands have the luxury of having these like long, drawn out planning cycles and running 6-month campaigns and waiting to new quarters to sort of like make changes. We very much operate in a sprint mentality where a lot of things that we do maybe happen in 4-6 week sprints, and throughout that, we're learning, experimenting, iterating, and just trying to improve what we're trying to create outcomes for. So that's how our media team operates, and as well as the rest of our marketing department. As it relates to the SaaS apocalypse, I think a lot of what you're seeing is, um, you know, a lot of just like hyperbole and kind of like
Mhm.
theorizing. I mean, like at least that's what we're seeing. You can, in theory, build your own SaaS. Is it a good SaaS? Probably not. Does it have does it have like all the context that a company that's been around for 15 plus years has been able to develop, as well as all the context within your business? Not really. And so we find that what our customers really love about working with HubSpot and like working with our CRM is that you have a platform that's being maintained and evolved by real engineers constantly, and that there's new products being launched all the time, new feature functionality being launched all the time, and that you don't have to maintain it
Mm.
yourself. And so we're actually just continue to see ongoing growth. And I think there are some really interesting AI upstarts out there, but none that I think have been able to kind of like deliver on the promise of this idea of like, you know, a homegrown SaaS that you vibe coded. I just think like a lot of it is like theoretical still at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like cyclical or not, but I think, well, how long's HubSpot been around again?
Yeah, 20 years.
The
20 years.
Yeah, so I guess my point is in software, it's not just a sure anyone can build an agent and a vibe code a platform
Yeah.
that will move data from someplace to another and take some context, but a platform that has 20 years of the understanding the nuance of that and there's sort of a almost a I wouldn't call it wisdom, but for lack of a better word, maybe that software platforms sort of acquire just by being around for and solving problems for so long. And that's what I feel like has happened with regard to what I meant by sort of cyclical.
Yeah.
Like, someone will go like, oh, we can do all this, and then they do all that. And yes, they have something that functions, but doesn't have that, quote unquote, wisdom of all those decisions over decades. And so you kind of either run back to the platform or figure out how to plug that in some other way. Maybe AI solves that problem. I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen 2 months to a year from now?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like I kind of find I think people who vibe code and myself included sort of find this hump once you've got the thing working well and looking good. That to really evolve it is like, oh, I don't want to become a full-time product designer to turn this thing into something that is the equivalent of a SaaS product.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's kind of what I found in my own kind of my own adventures of vibe coding as well, is that it it can create really great stuff. And we vibe code things on Lovable all the time within our media department, as well as new systems for improving how we approach things like post production. But that said, there are tools out there that are better, right? And so, at what point does the cost of investing that much time in vibe coding, upkeep, maintenance, artificially trying to create that context layer that maybe doesn't exist, get outweighed by the cost of maybe just licensing the tool and adding a couple of seats? And so I think that's the dynamic oftentimes that's at play.
Yeah, well, that kind of almost brings us full circle to what we started at with like,
Yeah.
build or buy in this media, or I guess it's more like build or rent or
Yeah.
acquire. I don't know. There's a bunch of different verbs you could use, but the
Yeah.
point is having them versus renting time on with branded content or some partnership on some other media brand. So I guess I would say, what's been the main thing you've learned about owning these brands and operating them that you would advise both other B2B maybe software brands that might be interested in going this place, but also like media brands
Yeah.
who are interested, not done just in being acquired, but like having better relationships with the tech industry.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is avoiding the instinct to try to shape what you're acquiring into something that fits a business need, like a very clear business need. I know that might sound kind of antithetical to like what a lot of companies ultimately want to do whenever they acquire something or think about their marketing objectives. But what we've very deliberately done whenever we've launched new media products or acquired media products is really just try to empower those creators, those journalists to just do more and better work by now having additional resources that maybe they didn't have before, and really thinking about the value being not only the trust that you're generating through those voices, as well as staying top of mind and covering more surface area through more times throughout the year, but also the monetization model and how that changes and ultimately benefits you in ways that maybe it hadn't whenever you worked with them as a creator, or in the previous model where they were mainly focused on ad sales. And
Mm,
so I think it's like just trying not to screw up the thing that you're buying by the headline would be. And
mm,
so that's a big thing. In terms of like creators that are ultimately looking to work more closely with tech kind of companies or being acquired by tech companies, I think it's a lot about being able to consistently prove value and to collaborate. I think, influencer strategies, creator strategies oftentimes get misperceived as these kind of like transactional, like more sophisticated forms of ad buys where you place an ad and then the creator says it or implements it into their content and that's it. And I found that those just tend to be like the least effective forms of influencer
mm,
and creator marketing, but ones where you're like co-creating things together and you're doing that because you know that if you create something that's inauthentic to your audience, you're going to get less engagement. And the brand knows that if you're creating something that is inauthentic to the audience, they're going to get less engagement. It behooves both the creator and the brand to work together, as opposed to it being this kind of like handoff where it's like, hey, here's the script. Hey, here's the ad creative. Drop it in your content. It just 9 times out of 10 does not work. And so I think that ultimately then sets the foundation for deeper partnerships. And ultimately, if your end goal is to be acquired, then I think you have like some really great data to be able to prove why that makes sense.
nice. So, as we wrap up here, I like to ask my guests the same question on as we go, and let's pick a couple of things. One that you're worried about in our AR future. So, projecting forward, what's the sort of a version of the future that you're worried about, and then what's something that you're hopeful about?
Yeah, the thing that I'm probably worried about is brands maybe getting too comfortable with a lower quality bar because of what AI is able to produce. I think AI has been a massive unlock for us from a content production perspective. But if you're just kind of using it to do the thing that is designed to then replace humans, like 100% of the time, it's not going to be as good. And so I just worry that like there's just going to be a continued influx and just like low quality, high output content that is going to add no value and say nothing new. And it's just going to continue to flood all the platforms and it's going to become, a fact of life. So I'm concerned about that. But I do think at the same time, what I'm optimistic about is I think that's then become a reason why people are starting to put better guardrails in place, like humanistic guardrails in place to ensure that while AI is helping them do things that were previously impossible, that there's still an element of humanity at different stages of the production to ensure that it's actually good. Like
Mhm.
the thing you're producing is actually going to provide value to the person you want to become your customer or the person you want to actually watch or view or listen to your content. And so I'm optimistic that that's kind of like the direction that we're heading and that the pendulum is swinging back in favor of capital J journalism and creators that actually bring something new and unique and valuable to the table, as opposed to I think sometimes the promise of AI being like the panacea for content creation. And so that's what I'm like a little nervous about, but also optimistic for.
Yeah, I hear you. It's a thing I always make sure is a step in whenever we use AI in our process is like, is this valuable?
Like
I
is
think that's
yeah,
too many people stop at this exists and is passable. Like it could
yeah,
satisfy someone. But is it something you really want to get out there that you'd be proud to share? Maybe don't. If
yeah,
it doesn't tick that box.
yeah, probably not. And at the end of the day, it's like, oftentimes all you get is the first impression, and if the first
Mm.
impression is kind of, it's, yeah, yeah, not to overuse, the term like slop, or if it's not valuable and doesn't provide anything new or unique or memorable, then you kind of wasted that chance. And so there's a place and a time for it. But I think most of the time, you definitely want to ensure that how you're presenting yourself out in the world is, a 10 out of 10 and the best representation of yourself.
Cool. We'll leave it there. Jonathan Hunt, thank you so much for dropping by the Media Copilot and sharing
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah. Thanks, Pete.
Hey, thanks for listening to my conversation with Jonathan Hunt. The Media Copilot is a podcast, so please follow or subscribe to us on the platform you're listening to us on. If you're on Spotify or Apple, please leave a 5-star review and a note about what you like. And if you're on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. All of those things really do help the show because they put the podcast in front of more people. The Media Copilot is produced by Muso Media. Look for their link in the show notes, and don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter as well. Thanks again for being here. Be seeing you in the future.